I've always believed effort didn't need an audience. If something had to be done, I did it. Quietly. Completely. Without waiting for someone to clap at the end. My name is Lena Harper, and at 28, I had built my life on small, reliable habits. I worked as a project coordinator at a logistics firm. Nothing glamorous, just deadlines, spreadsheets, and systems that worked because I did. I paid my rent on time. I tracked my expenses. I remembered birthdays. I answered calls when things went wrong. Responsibility was my native language. My younger brother, Evan, spoke something else entirely. Charm, mostly. Big ideas. Big promises. The kind that sounded impressive until you asked for details. He was 2 years younger than me and had mastered the art of appearing busy without actually being anchored to anything. He talked about projects, connections, and next steps, like they were destinations instead of excuses. Still, none of that surprised me. Families get used to their patterns. What surprised me was the text that arrived late Thursday afternoon, just as I was wrapping up a weekly report. Mom, Sunday dinner, 6 p.m. sharp. Don't be late. We're celebrating. Celebrating what? I typed back. 3 dots appeared. Disappeared. Appeared again. Mom, you'll see. It's important. Your dad wants everyone there. That was never a good sign. Our family wasn't a surprise family. We were a paper plates and passive comments family. Big announcements usually came with strings attached, and those strings always wrapped themselves around the same person. I had a feeling I knew who. By Saturday night, confirmation arrived in pieces. A group message lighting up with relatives who never coordinated unless there was something worth witnessing. My aunt saying she'd bring dessert. My grandmother asking if she should dress up. A cousin texting, "What did Evan do now?" I didn't answer. I went to dinner anyway. I always did. Sunday arrived heavy with gray clouds and the low pressure that made everything feel slower. My parents' house looked different when I pulled up, too neat. Lawn trimmed. Porch swept. The kind of effort that meant company, not comfort. Inside, the smell of roasted chicken and something sweet hit me immediately. Candles were lit in the dining room, even though it was still daylight. Extra chairs lined the walls. On the counter sat a store-bought cake with bright blue lettering that simply read, "Congratulations." No name. No reason. "Hey," I said, shrugging off my coat. Mom turned from the stove with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "You made it. Good. What are we celebrating?" I asked. She waved her hand vaguely. "Let's wait till everyone's here." That answer tightened something in my chest. By 6 o'clock, the house was full. Voices overlapping. Laughter bouncing off walls that had heard the same jokes for decades. My dad moved through the room refilling glasses, satisfied in the way men are when things go exactly according to plan. Evan arrived at 6:12. He swept in like timing was optional, wearing a new jacket and confidence that looked freshly ironed. He hugged Mom, clapped Dad on the shoulder, and flashed a grin at everyone like he was already accepting applause. "Traffic," he said, even though we all knew he lived 10 minutes away. Dinner was served. Plates passed. Conversations braided together. I tried to focus on the normalcy of it, the scrape of silverware, the clink of glasses, but my body stayed alert like it was waiting for a cue. Then Dad stood. He lifted his glass and cleared his throat. The room settled into silence with practiced ease. "I just want to say," he began, smiling broadly, "that nights like this remind me how proud I am of this family." I felt my shoulders tense. "Especially," he continued, eyes shifting toward Evan, "when one of us really steps up." Evan straightened slightly, already anticipating the moment. "Some people talk about ambition," Dad said. "Some people plan. But your brother, he actually tries. He puts in the work. He's the only one around here who does." The words landed like a plate shattering inside me. Laughter followed. Not because it was funny, but because people didn't know what else to do. A couple of claps. Someone murmured, "Here, here." I stared down at my plate. In that moment, something inside me didn't explode. It cracked. A quiet, invisible break. The kind you don't notice until everything after feels different. Dad kept talking. About effort. About initiative. About how proud he was. No one looked at me. Not when my rent reminder buzzed earlier that month for an apartment Evan still technically lived in. Not when I covered the electric bill. Just this once. Not when I rearranged my own budget so someone else could keep pretending. I lifted my eyes slowly. Evan was smiling, soaking it in. Dad looked pleased. Mom looked relieved. Like this was the celebration she'd been waiting for. And I realized, sitting there with my fork untouched, that this wasn't just about Evan being praised. It was about me being erased. The dinner continued, but I barely tasted a thing. My chest felt hollow, like something essential had finally slipped loose. I didn't know what I was going to do yet. I only knew this. Whatever broke inside me at that table wasn't going to quietly repair itself. And for the first time in my life, I didn't feel tired. I felt done. Dinner didn't stop after my dad's speech. Plates were refilled. Glasses clinked again. Conversation staggered back to life like nothing irreversible had just happened. But something had. I could feel it in the way my jaw stayed tight, and how every sound felt sharper than it should have been. Laughter scraped instead of landing softly. Even the candles seemed too bright, exposing rather than warming. Evan leaned back in his chair, basking. He told a story about a potential opportunity he'd been chasing, using words like pivot and network as if they were proof of effort. My aunt nodded along. My cousin asked questions she didn't actually care about. Dad listened like a proud sponsor. No one asked me anything. I cut my chicken into neat pieces, even though I wasn't hungry. Control had always been my armor. If I could keep my movements steady, my voice calm, no one would notice the fracture spreading through my chest. "Lena," Dad said suddenly, turning toward me. "You're quiet tonight." Every face pivoted in my direction. I forced a small smile. Just listening. "Well," he said, gesturing broadly, "maybe you could learn a thing or two from your brother. About initiative." The room went still again, this time heavier. I felt it then, the shift. Not anger. Not sadness. Clarity. This wasn't accidental. This was a pattern being performed in public. I set my fork down carefully. "You're right," I said. Dad nodded, satisfied. Evan smirked slightly, already chalking this up as another win. "You're right," I repeated louder now. "Initiative matters." I paused, letting the silence stretch. "That's why," I continued. "Starting next month, Evan will need to cover his own expenses." The words were calm, even, measured. Mom's hand froze midair. "What do you mean?" she asked. I mean," I said, folding my napkin, "I won't be paying his rent anymore." The reaction wasn't immediate. It rolled through the room slowly, like thunder following lightning. Dad frowned. "What are you talking about?" "I've been covering his apartment," I said, looking directly at him, "for the last 8 months." A chair creaked. Someone inhaled sharply. Evan laughed, a quick, dismissive sound. "Okay, that's dramatic. She helped me out a couple times." 8 months, I repeated. "Every month. On the 1st. My aunt blinked. "You pay his rent." I nodded. "Most of it. Sometimes all." Mom's face drained of color. "Why didn't you tell us?" I swallowed. "Because no one asked." Evan's smile faltered. "Lena, come on. You didn't have to say it like that." "Like what?" I asked, accurately. Dad stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. "This isn't the time to air grievances." I met his gaze. "You chose the time when you decided to praise effort you don't actually see." His jaw tightened. "Your brother is trying." "So am I," said softly. I just don't announce it." The table erupted in overlapping voices. "That's a lot of money." "Why are you paying?" "Evan, is that true?" Evan rubbed his face, suddenly flustered. I'm getting on my feet. Things just haven't lined up yet. They lined up well enough for you to get that jacket, my cousin muttered. Mom stood quickly. Please, let's not do this right now. When? I asked. After the next bill? The next? Just until things stabilize? Dad pointed at me. You're humiliating him. I shook my head. No, I'm correcting the record. Silence dropped hard. Evan pushed his chair back. I don't need this, he muttered. I came here to celebrate. Celebrate what? I asked quietly. He didn't answer. He grabbed his phone, his keys, his jacket. As he moved toward the door, Dad followed him, calling his name. The front door slammed moments later, rattling the frame. No one spoke. Mom sank back into her chair, suddenly smaller. My grandmother stared down at her folded napkin. The cake sat untouched on the counter, its bright lettering now feeling absurd. I exhaled slowly, my hands trembling, just enough that I tucked them into my lap. I didn't plan to say that tonight, I said mostly to myself. But I wasn't going to sit there and pretend I don't exist. Mom looked at me, eyes glossy. You should have told us. I met her gaze. You knew, just not the numbers. Dad didn't return. The rest of the evening dissolved quietly. Dishes were cleared without appetite. Conversations stayed shallow, careful, like everyone was afraid of setting off another truth. When I finally stood to leave, Mom hugged me too tightly. We'll talk, she said. I nodded. Okay. Outside, the night air was cool and damp. My car sat under the streetlight, ordinary and waiting. As I drove away, my phone stayed dark. No calls, no apologies, no praise, but something else filled the space instead. Relief, because for the first time, I hadn't swallowed the truth to keep the peace. And whatever broke inside me at that table had made room for something stronger. Boundaries. The silence didn't arrive all at once. It crept in, hour by hour, message by message that never came. Monday morning, my phone was quiet. No text from Mom asking if I'd calmed down. No call from Dad explaining how I'd misunderstood him. Evan didn't even send a sarcastic meme, which would have been easier to process than nothing. At work, I moved through my tasks with practiced efficiency. Emails answered. Meetings attended. Deadlines met. From the outside, nothing had changed. Inside, I felt like I'd stepped off something solid and was still waiting to feel the ground. On Wednesday, Mom finally called. I just wanted to check in, she said, voice soft, cautious. Things got intense. They did, I agreed. Your father is upset. I almost smiled. Of course he was. Anger had always been his way of protecting disappointment. And Evan? I asked. A pause. He's figuring things out. I looked out the office window at the traffic inching forward below. That's good. Another pause. He's staying with a friend for a bit. The word evicted hovered between us, unspoken. I'm not changing my mind, I said gently before she could ask. I know, she replied, sounding more tired than angry. I just didn't realize how much you were carrying. I wanted to believe that. I really did. That night, I came home to an apartment that felt different without the weight of someone else's survival pressing on it. The fridge held food I bought for myself. The calendar on the wall had one fewer obligation scribbled in the margins. On the first of the month, I paid my rent and stopped there. No transfer, no backup plan, no safety net extended beyond my own life. It felt strange, like standing still after years of bracing for impact. Evan didn't disappear gracefully. 2 weeks later, I got a text from an unfamiliar number. Hey, it's Evan. I stared at the screen longer than necessary. Can we talk? I didn't answer right away. Not because I was angry, but because I needed to be sure of myself before I did. When I finally replied, it was simple. What's going on? His response came fast. I messed up. Things are worse than I thought. We met at a coffee shop near my place, Neutral Ground. He arrived looking thinner, less polished. The jacket from dinner was gone, replaced by something worn and practical. I didn't think you'd actually stop, he said, not unkindly. Just honest. I told you I would, I replied. He nodded, staring into his cup. I know. I thought Dad would step in. There it was. I felt a familiar ache rise and settle behind my ribs. And did he? Evan exhaled slowly. He tried, but it's different when it's constant. I waited. I'm behind on everything, he admitted. Rent. Credit cards. I owe people. Do you have a plan? I asked. He hesitated. I was hoping you could help me figure one out. That at least felt like progress. We talked for an hour. No yelling. No accusations. Just facts. Numbers. Consequences. The language I spoke fluently. By the end, his situation was worse than I'd imagined. This isn't something I can fix for you, I said finally, but I can help you understand it. He looked up. You won't help me? I will, I corrected. Just not the way you want. I walked him through budgeting basics, job listings, realistic timelines. He listened, really listened, for the first time I could remember. I don't know if I can do all this, he said quietly. I didn't know if I could either, I replied. But I did. He left without asking for money. That night Dad called. I heard you met with your brother, he said, skipping any greeting. Yes. You could have handled this differently. I leaned back against my kitchen counter. You mean quietly? You embarrassed him, Dad snapped. No, I said. I stopped enabling him. A long silence. He's struggling, Dad said finally. I know, I replied. So am I. The difference is I learned how to stand. He hung up. Weeks passed. Evan picked up work. Nothing glamorous. Long hours. Small paychecks. I heard about it through Mom, who oscillated between worry and pride. He's tired, she said one evening, but he's showing up. That mattered. One night, my phone buzzed close to midnight. A photo. Evan's shoes on a concrete floor, worn and wet. Still here, the caption read. I typed back. Good. Not encouragement. Not praise. Acknowledgement. Because effort doesn't need an audience. And for the first time, my brother was learning what that meant. Evan didn't fail loudly. There was no dramatic announcement, no explosion that forced everyone to look. His breaking point arrived the way most real ones do. Quietly, after too many days stacked on top of each other with no room to rest. I noticed it first in the messages. At the beginning, he'd text updates like they were proof of life. Picked up another shift. Warehouse starts at 6. Didn't quit today. Short, factual, almost proud. Then the gaps between them grew longer. A day. 2. Sometimes 3. Mom filled in the blanks when she called. He's exhausted, she said one night, voice thin with worry. Barely sleeping. He looks different. I knew what that meant. Reality was finally heavy enough to leave marks. Then came the call that snapped everything into focus. It was a Wednesday afternoon. I was in the middle of a status meeting, half listening, half typing notes, when my phone buzzed repeatedly on the desk beside me. Mom's name. 3 missed calls in a row. I stepped out into the hallway and answered. He collapsed, she said, breathless. At work. They're taking him to the hospital. The world narrowed to a single, cold line. I'm on my way, I said, already grabbing my coat. The hospital smelled like antiseptic and old coffee. Evan lay in the bed with an 4 in his arm, eyes closed, face pale in a way I'd never seen before. He looked smaller, stripped of performance and bravado. When he opened his eyes and saw me, he flinched slightly. Don't, he said hoarsely. Don't what? I asked, pulling up a chair. Don't say it. I shook my head. I'm not here to win. He swallowed. Good, because I'm losing. Mom stood near the window, arms wrapped around herself. Dad arrived later, still in work clothes, jaw tight with contained anger. This has gone far enough, Dad said, voice sharp. 3 jobs? No sleep? This is ridiculous. Evan turned his head, slowly. It's what it costs. Dad scoffed. You don't have to do this. We can help you refinance. We'll fix it. Something in Evan's expression changed then. Not relief. Resolve. No, he said. The word landed heavier than any shout. No. Dad repeated. Evan pushed himself upright, wincing. I already sold the car. The room froze. What? Mom whispered. I sold it last week, Evan said. Used the money to pay down the loan. The rest went to rent. I'm still behind, but I'm not drowning anymore. Dad stared at him like he'd spoken in another language. You didn't have to do that. That's the problem, Evan said quietly. I always thought I didn't. Silence pressed in from all sides. I watched my brother in that moment, not the version my family celebrated, not the one I resented, but the one standing there without illusions. Bruised, tired, real. Dad exhaled sharply. You worked yourself into the hospital. Evan met his gaze. I worked myself into the truth. No one argued after that. Evan was released the next morning with instructions that sounded suspiciously like boundaries. Rest, eat, slow down. The irony wasn't lost on any of us. Over the next few weeks, something shifted. Evan didn't quit working, but he changed how he did it. Fewer shifts, better food, actual sleep. The work stayed hard, but it stopped being self-destruction disguised as ambition. He started texting again, got paid rent, still standing. One evening, an alert popped up on my phone. Deposit $1,200 Evan H. I stared at it, pulse quickening. A message followed seconds later. First repayment. I know it's not everything. I sat down on my couch, the weight of it settling slowly. It wasn't the money. It was the meaning. Dad didn't call to congratulate him. Not at first. Pride is slower to arrive when it has to admit it was wrong. Mom did, though. He's different, she said softly. Not flashy. Just steady. That word warmed something in me I hadn't realized was still cold. The next family dinner was quiet. No speeches. No applause. Just food and cautious conversation. Evan arrived early. Helped set the table. Ate slowly. Halfway through, Dad cleared his throat. I owe you an apology, he said, looking at me. I didn't see what you were carrying. I nodded, unable to speak just yet. Evan looked between us. You were right, he said to me. About all of it. I held his gaze. Just don't forget it when things get easier. He smiled faintly. I won't. That night, as I drove home, I thought about the moment at that first dinner, the sentence that broke something inside me. I realize now that what broke wasn't weakness. It was patience without purpose. And what replaced it was something far stronger. Truth. Recognition doesn't arrive with trumpets. Sometimes it slips in quietly, after the damage is already done, and asks if it's still welcome. After Evan's hospital scare, the family dynamic adjusted in small, almost unnoticeable ways. Dad stopped making comparisons, at least out loud. Mom stopped calling me only when something was wrong. And Evan started pausing before he spoke, like he was weighing the cost of every word. For the first time, I wasn't the background noise holding everything together. I was just there. Dad began calling on Sunday evenings, not to ask for favors, not to complain about Evan, just to talk. At first, the conversations were stiff, filled with weather updates and safe topics. But slowly cracks formed. I didn't know how much you helped him, Dad admitted one night, staring at his untouched plate across from me at a small diner we'd chosen halfway between our places. I didn't advertise it, I said. He nodded. I know. That's part of why I missed it. That felt like something opening. Evan kept working. He didn't climb ladders or chase titles. He showed up, paid his bills, took the bus instead of complaining about the car he no longer had. When people asked how he was doing, he answered honestly. Tired, he'd say, but it's mine. One afternoon, I got an envelope in the mail. Handwritten address. No return label. Inside was a check and a short note. I'm paying you back the long way. Thank you for not saving me the easy way. I folded the paper carefully and placed it in my desk drawer. Not as proof, as reminder. Healing, I learned, isn't about going back to who you were before the hurt. It's about becoming someone who doesn't accept it again. At the next family gathering, Dad surprised everyone. He raised his glass, glanced around the table, then looked directly at me. I want to say something, he began, and I want it to be clear. My stomach tightened. I was wrong, he said. I thought effort looked a certain way. Loud, visible, immediate. I didn't understand the quiet work happening behind the scenes. No one spoke. I'm proud of both my children, he finished. For different reasons. It wasn't perfect, but it was real. Evan met my eyes and gave a small nod. Not gratitude. Respect. Later that evening, as we washed dishes side by side, he spoke without looking at me. You know, he said, I used to think you were just lucky, like things came easier to you. I laughed softly. They didn't. I know that now, he replied. You were just willing to pay the price, quietly. That mattered more than any apology. Boundaries stayed in place. I didn't step back into the role of fixer. When Evan struggled, he handled it. When Dad got frustrated, he owned it. The family didn't collapse without me holding every beam. It adjusted. One night, months later, I sat alone in my apartment, bills paid, calendar clear, life steady. I thought about that first Sunday dinner, the sentence that cracked something open inside me. Your brother's the only one who actually puts in the effort. Back then, it felt like a verdict. Now, it felt like a turning point. Because effort isn't proven by who's praised. It's proven by who keeps going when no one is watching. And for the first time, I wasn't chasing acknowledgement. I was standing in self-respect. Some endings don't arrive with fireworks. They arrive quietly, like a room finally exhaling after holding its breath for years. Life didn't suddenly become perfect after that dinner. There were no movie-style reconciliations, no tearful group hugs that erased the past. Instead, there was something far more honest: space. Space to breathe. Space to choose. Space to exist without being measured against someone else's struggle. I started noticing how much energy I had when I stopped spending it on being useful. Mornings became calmer. I stopped waking up already tired, already bracing myself for a call that might pull me into someone else's emergency. My phone still rang, but it rang differently. Not with panic. With intention. Evan called sometimes. Not often. When he did, it wasn't to ask for money or advice. It was to share progress. I got promoted to shift lead, he said one evening, almost surprised by his own words. It doesn't pay much more, but they trust me. That's big, I said. Yeah, he replied. I think so too. He didn't ask for praise. He didn't need it anymore. Dad changed more slowly. Pride doesn't loosen its grip overnight, but it did soften. He started asking questions, real ones, about my work, my plans, what I wanted instead of what I provided. One afternoon, while helping him clean out the garage, he paused with an old box in his hands. You know, he said, I always thought being strong meant not needing anyone. I waited. But maybe, he continued, it means knowing when you've leaned too hard. The apology wasn't dramatic. It didn't need to be. Mom, in her own way, began unlearning habits too. She stopped cushioning everyone from consequences, stopped smoothing over discomfort before it could teach something. She listened more, spoke less. Our family didn't become flawless. It became functional. The real change, though, happened in me. I stopped shrinking in rooms where I had always been expected to stand quietly. I stopped over-explaining my choices. When I said no, I didn't follow it with guilt or justification. And the world didn't fall apart. One evening, I hosted dinner in my own apartment. Nothing fancy, just food I liked, Music I chose, conversation that didn't revolve around crisis management. As we sat around the table, I caught Evan watching me. "You seem lighter," he said. "I am," I replied. Dad nodded slowly. "You always carried yourself like someone bracing for impact." I smiled faintly. I was. After they left, I stood alone in the kitchen, washing dishes in comfortable silence. I thought about how long I had mistaken endurance for purpose, how often I had confused being needed with being valued. That Sunday dinner, the one that broke something inside me, no longer felt like a wound. It felt like a line. Before it, I lived for approval I never fully received. After it, I lived for integrity I could feel. I learned that effort doesn't always look impressive. Sometimes it looks like paying bills on time, showing up even when you're tired, choosing boundaries over applause. Sometimes it looks like walking away from a table where your worth is being miscalculated. And sometimes the bravest thing you can do is stop proving what was never doubted in the first place. I don't know if my father will ever fully understand the weight of his words that night. I don't need him to, because I finally do. I know what I carried. I know what I built. I know what I refused to lose. And that knowledge doesn't need a witness. It just needs peace.